So let's just start off here with this sound called Bright Light. So you can see here, it is off of Synthwave Essentials Volume 1. Again, you could go to synthdesigner.com and download this preset pack for free. So this sound here, as we can see just by clicking a note here, let's start with the obvious elements of the oscillators here. We have a little bit of a sub here. Then we have this basic shape. It's kind of a sine wave, slightly different. So these two are playing together, not much sound added here, other than that kind of low end. This is where it really gets that character. This kind of wobbling kind of saw wave here, as you see, but just having this would be kind of boring. As you can see here, I use this warp menu here to create a bend plus minus, and if you have vital, you could do the same thing. It's really just kind of giving it some differentiation here. So I've done it through the LFO here. As you can see, both envelopes here are kind of plucky envelopes, and that is part of the element of a keys sound as well. You don't want a fully sustained sound. That's for pads. Keys are kind of not that super plucky sound, but it's kind of like mimicking a piano in a way, right? And you'll notice in a lot of these sounds that I have several elements here that make up the sound through the oscillators. And that is because I feel like having these complementary elements is really what makes keys stand out, right? If you had just one or the other, this works too, but it's a little thin, I think. This kind of adds just a little bit of that depth to it as well. Now this bend plus minus is really working hard at creating that differentiation here, that kind of movement, as well as this fine knob here and here through this LFO. You want a little bit of movement as well in the fine tuning. The effects here is also giving it a lot of different quality. I have the reverb, delay, and some compression. The compression is the over-the-top compression. I think if you turn this off, this works as well. But I really wanted a little bit more of that kind of that over-the-top sound, this over-the-top style compression. So this is just one example here, but let's get into a couple other examples that I created. And this one in particular, this retro keys, is a great example of why I said at the beginning that it can really depend on the kind of feel you want from these keys. As you can see here, we have very similar oscillators here, but let's just listen to this sound. As you can hear, it's really differentiated by kind of that retro quality. And how do we get that? So first, the envelopes are obviously different here. Only acting on this one envelope. It's not opening up this cutoff here. The next thing is we have this tube distortion. This tube distortion gives it that grit. And that grit is really kind of part of that vintagey sound too. We have a little bit of dimension, but I think between the tube distortion and the filter cutoff being lower, if it's way up here, it's not as vintagey sounding. I wanted to kind of have not just a vintage sound, but kind of a darker, more mellow sound. So this could also be used in kind of more chill sounds as well, if you think about it. But again, we have this movement here that creates that instability, right? This sound here is very unique as well. Let's just listen. This one, I wanted to even be more retro type of sound. And again, with these LFOs is what you could create some of these movements here. This envelope is also different. It's a little bit more sustained, but it has that plucky quality to it as well if you wanted to have it. You can hear as well this noise is creating and adding to that vintage sound as well. Effects similar to before, but we're not adding any distortion. Some basic chorus, delay, reverb, taking out some of those lows here. This PWM Rezo does a lot of work here. And I often, like I said, layer these things. And I like to have kind of this basis of a sound here with this kind of basic sound or basic shape. And then I add, as you can hear, a pretty unique sound here. So the two really complement each other well, whereas this one takes up so much room, this one takes up a lot less room and adds just a little bit of that upper end along with the noise, creating that kind of vintagey sound. Now going back to a brighter sound here with this one. Again, what's the common denominator here is this movement here that I created with this LFO. And once again, these envelopes, not quite plucky, not quite sustained. This noise level kind of jumping up with this envelope. Effects, once again, created with some basic hyper, chorus, delay, reverb, and I'm boosting up some of these highs. So again, we have kind of a more basic saw here. It is changed because of this wavetable position. It looks a little funkier, but it's basically a saw. And then this one here is what is moving it a bunch. So I'm creating kind of that complementary factor to it. So let's just create our own here, and we'll start off with some basic shapes here. Let's go with just up the unison of these a little bit. We'll keep this one down. So we're gonna just up it to about 5 here. We're gonna obviously put on a filter here. Again, we're gonna go down to our envelopes. Let's just set up the whole shape first, and then we'll think about the oscillators. So we'll have both our first and second envelope similar. The second envelope will open things up. So then we're gonna just do this. And we're gonna obviously add both of these to the filter. Add a little bit of drive. So now let's just think about this. So we have this one as our basis. Let's maybe move this one up an octave. I'm going to maybe up the sustain just a touch. And up the decay a little bit too. Getting a little bit more of a full sound here. And then we're gonna look for something more interesting here. Maybe find something like this. And then again, we're gonna take this LFO here. And we're going to also take this into account for the fine tune. Just a little bit. Now that we have that, let's set up some effects here and see how we can create some more interesting sounds here. So we're going to just take down some of these lows. Generally, if you think about keys, they're going to not be in your bass notes, right? So we don't want them clashing with the bass. Then we're going to add some reverb, or maybe let's add a little chorus and see how that sounds. Slow down the rate a bit. Now let's add some reverb. Let's up this envelope 1 as well, the decay here. So I'm going to turn this level down a bit because I want this to come through a bit more. Now we're getting somewhere as well. And we can even play around with this. Maybe do a bend plus minus. And let's look at another LFO here. Maybe do this one a little slower. Maybe we can add a little bit more dimension to it. Let's think about the delay here as well. Not too much feedback. Ping pong it a little bit. So it sounds really nice already, I think. And of course, we can up the cutoff. The resonance also adds different character, depending on what we want. We can also change how the envelope opens things up. So as simple as that, you could create different types of sounds here, key sounds that can fit your mix. Now, obviously I used a saw wave here that's unique to Serum. However, you should think about these in more simple terms. Think about how you can play around with these types of oscillators and having different complementary oscillators and just test things out to see how they might sound for you together and on their own. Remember, there's no hard and fast rules here. It's really about a few basic things. Creating a little bit of movement, even though these aren't fully sustained sounds, through kind of modulations of different wavetable positions, bend plus minus, warping, stuff like that. You could do that through Vital as well. Now, if you have something a little bit more standard like Diva, let's just take a look real quickly at what we could do here. So let's go into a template. So we got the Jupe 8 here. So what we're going to do is play around with a couple of different basic shapes here with the oscillators. So first, we're going to set up our ADSR again. So we got it set up here, and what we're going to do is obviously up the envelope as well. So we're going to turn the cutoff down. As you can see, we have just right in the middle the mix between these two saw waves, so we could play around here as well. Take out some of those lows. A little bit of chorus. Here we can stack the voices a little bit more. Turn on some reverb as well. I'll turn this chorus off. Took out that pulse wave. So really depending on your synthesizer, your ADSR can be really, really important. I mean, it's always important, but it can really affect the sound. Now we're getting more towards a keys sound, whereas before it's a little bit more too sustained, I think. Can even turn up some vibrato here. So we're getting towards a key sound again. Don't get too caught up on which synthesizer you're using once more, and just think about those basics that we talked about. The ADSR, not too sustained, not too plucky. You're gonna be using different types of oscillators and wave shapes. I would stick to kind of more saws, triangles types of things. You can experiment as much as you want. You want kind of that brighter upper end, but also you want some of that kind of sustained lower end to kind of complement it as well. So just think about those things, and then think about how you could just add little tiny elements to try and differentiate it from other key sounds and to kind of give it some movement, and you'll get to some cool sounds. So anyway, let's get into how to create this preset. So as you can see, I have all three oscillators working here, 2 sine waves here, one on the sub and one on oscillator A. And then I have this bent out of shape saw wave that we'll discuss in a minute. First, I just want to point out, as like many of my patches, I don't want to go through the LFO here, but a lot of my patches you'll find have a kind of movement to them on the fine knobs here. I almost always put something on here when it comes to synthwave sounds, just to give it that kind of character, and to not let them stay too static. So let's bypass these here and bypass them here. That sounds cool. It's a big sound. And then let's put that back on. Kind of gives that detuned wobble, but very, very subtle. But it makes a big difference in the end. Let's look over here and you'll see that there's unison, 4 voice of unison on oscillator B, and it's also up an octave. So let's just turn that down. Completely different. But once you add that extra bit, it makes, or extra octave, sorry, it really adds to the sound. And as you'll see here, the bend in the warp section is turned on, and it's turned up all the way. The LFO here is on just a quarter note rate, and it makes a huge difference when it comes to the sound. So let's bypass this. Yeah, it kind of sounds okay, but it really makes a difference when it's on. Gives it that flutter to it, that gives it the character. The envelopes here, very similar. Envelope 2 is attached to the filter. Now when we turn off the filter, actually it's not a bad sound when you turn off the filter here. If you need that kind of upper harmonics, then that's actually great just to turn it off and keep it off. I do keep it off of the A oscillator because it doesn't make too much of a difference. But it does tame B a lot when you turn it off, and when you turn it on, sorry. So here's it off, and here's it on. Just that upper range is kind of gone a little bit. I do turn up a little bit of a drive, not much resonance here. So let's go over to the effects and discuss those. As you can see, reverb and delay dominate the sound. I really have a lot of delays in the upper range, but pretty much nothing in the lower. And you could hear it just bouncing like crazy. It's just completely dead. And when it's on, it really makes a difference. Reverb as well, obviously. You don't necessarily need the reverb. You can use a third-party plugin, and oftentimes you need to add a little bit anyway. But it really adds a lot of character to it, and I did cut out some of the lows as well. So that's about it. It really acts as a great complement to your sounds, and also you can use it as a lead if you want. But I think it's really meant more of a kind of as an accent to everything. Today we're going to be talking about a very simple preset that I designed. I called it Tiny Pop. Although it's part of my Synthwave Essentials pack, it could be used for a lot of different types of genres. So let's hear it. As you can hear, it's pretty simple, but it really would be a great little preset that could pop right through the mix if you just want something in the background, or even as a lead sound. So let's just take a look at how it's designed. So let's start with the wavetables. Over here, I'm just using one oscillator as a basic square wave, and I turned it up an octave. Let's hear how it sounds without the filter. So super bright. I really like using just a basic low pass filter, as I'll show you in a little bit, but as you can see, it's just a basic square wave. There's no unison, pretty much left everything stock. So let's move over down to the envelopes and the LFOs. So again here, very simple. I'm not even using the LFO here. The envelope 2 and envelope 1 are very similar. I just turned down the sustain to nothing, basically just a small little release on both of them. And the decay is turned down significantly. So it's a little too long. I just want it really punchy and quick. And that's it there. So let's move over to the filter. So the filter here, as I said before, I have it on as a basic low pass. I just want to cut out those harsh upper harmonics. And I have a little bit of drive here, just a little bit to color it. You don't need to turn it up too much. And a little bit of resonance just to give it that character. So, pretty simple. So I just wanted to take you over now to the effects. Again, very simple, very basic delay and reverb. That's it. There's really no need to do anything else. You can add compression if you want, and you can add distortion if you want to color it more, but it's a simple key that's meant to just be kind of maybe a lead or a background sound, so it doesn't have to be too complicated. But let's just turn them off in here. You can hear super dry. That great like ping pong delay effect here and a little bit of reverb. So let's get started with this keys sound, which is not exactly a lead, but it can definitely be used in different kind of contexts. For sure, it can be kind of a lead sound as well. So let's listen to it. So as you can hear, it's got that nice kind of like keys element to it, but it really is a very bright kind of lead sound too. So this one's called Automated Light. And as you can see here, we're not using traditional kind of simple wave shapes. We have this, whatever this is called, SQR_SAW_WRD. And as you can see, there's a bunch of movement to these, and we also have the MB saw and some noise here. This wave shape here and this one are both up an octave. As you can hear, there's a little bit of movement here caused by this LFO here. It's on the flip function, so it's really kind of a subtle movement. You can really kind of flip it completely on its head here, but then it'll really kind of drastically alter the sound. And especially since this is still kind of sustained, it'll kind of muddle it up too much. So I have it kind of going a little bit, but not too much, just enough to kind of give it some wobble, as well as some detunement here. The envelopes here, envelope 1 and envelope 2 are pretty similar. This one is attached to the filter, and that's just kind of opening it up a little bit. And then we also have it attached to the level of the noise to give it kind of that noise coming through without it being sustained. There's some effects here with the hyper here that's on, as well as the dimension, giving it a little bit more kind of width and size to it, as well as a little bit of chorus and some reverb and delay. And then I'm boosting even more of the highs just to give it really that bright character to it. This next sound is also technically a keys sound, but again, can be used in a lead context. This one's called New Discovery, and it's a little bit more mellow, not quite as bright, so let's listen in. As you can hear, it can brighten up a little bit, especially when you go up in the higher octaves. So what do we have here? This one's a little bit simpler. It's just this one oscillator here, no noise or anything. This oscillator is really, this wave shape, is very unique, called the MB Triangle Metal. Not even sure where this is from, whether this is from analog or somewhere else. Nope, it's, I believe, yep, it's right there in the analog section. I have the LFO giving it a kind of a little bit more detunement. Again, I love to do that to give it a little bit more kind of analog feel. There's also the 5 voice of unison, but not very much detunement. And the 2 envelopes here, as you can see, again, I have this second envelope opening it up a little bit, but it's not all the way. If we open up too much, it's an interesting sound for sure, but this is not the character I was going for here. I wanted to be a little bit more mellow, but of course, feel free to play around with that. There is a little bit of resonance here. I feel like that opens it up and makes it a little bit lighter. Again, hyper and just delay and reverb. Giving it that nice tail to it. This last sound here is called Slightly Cloudy. Again, some unique wave shapes here and some unique noise oscillator usage as well. So let's listen in. This is more of a true lead sound. Kind of got that filtered, kind of old school analog-y kind of sound again, and something I really enjoyed doing and creating. And as you can see, it's really reliant on this kind of unique wave shape. That's really producing a lot of the sound here. The saw is really meant to kind of give it a little bit more depth to it. And the noise oscillator is adding a little bit of richness too, of the deep space textures. So I'm not quite sure where I got this, if I'm being honest, but it's a custom noise. And it's just adding a little bit of extra kind of unique character to it. Again, a little bit of detunement here from the LFOs. And this one is acting on the PWM, so the pulse width modulation, which is really giving it that movement. I have it on the level here to kind of give it some tremolo effect. While this is, again, the saw wave is kind of like the stable base of it, while this one is doing a lot of the detuning. Again, I have a little bit of hyper, a little bit of distortion here this time, some tube distortion to add just a little bit of that harmonic content, and of course, cutting out some of these lows with the EQ, and some delay and reverb. Not too much on this one. Today I want to talk about a really brassy type of sound that you hear in a lot of 80s music, really famous in Europe's Final Countdown, and here's how it sounds. So it has that really chorusy kind of brassy tone to it that you would hear in a lot of 80s music. So why don't we get right into it? So let's start with the 2 oscillators that we see here. Now usually in a lot of 80s music, you'll see a lot of stock type of wavetables like your squares, your saws. And today I'm using something similar, but I use the Basic Mini here to start. Now, the Basic Mini has a lot of different kind of interesting shapes. There are variations on the regular shapes. And I'm using this kind of half saw, half sine, whatever you want to call it here, and then a regular saw. And both of them have a bit of unison voicing. So let's turn that down and see how that would sound. So the tone's the same, but we want that width to it. The envelope section is where we get a lot of the shape to the sound. So rather than just a normal complete sustain sound, I turn the sustain down and turn the decay up. So it kind of gets to a certain point and then falls down. And they're similar in shape, but not quite the same. Because of the brassy tone we kind of want to recreate a little bit of that brass instrument sound. And if you think about brass instruments, they don't have that quick attack. It's not like a immediate clap sound, for example. It's kind of that slight swell to it, right? And you could hear just a little of that in this envelope. It's very short, but it's still noticeable. So let's turn it down all the way. So you could hear just that slight delay in attack there. So let's head over and check out where I link this to. And it's on the filter, and you'll notice the filter isn't quite my usual low pass, high pass. I have it on this flange filter here. It's the flange H6 Plus. I'm not exactly sure what that stands for, not really the point. But what it creates is this interesting resonance to it. So if we turn the resonance down, it kind of accentuates the sound a little bit. And the drive is also way up. Now you'll notice the cutoff as well is on a certain position. If you turn it way up, it loses a lot of that character. So I have it right about in the 10 o'clock position, you could call it. And I find that gives us the most character. It gets very strange and phasey kind of sounding when you lower it. So let's keep it right around there. And then we have this filter variation here as well. And I actually have it going downwards here. So the envelope is attached, but it starts lower and then it turns up higher. Now heading over to the effects, we notice that there's the hyper, chorus, delay, and reverb. Also there's a little bit of EQ. The EQ is just meant to filter out some of the highs here. It gets very, very bright, so I just wanted to tone it down just a little bit. The main drivers of the sound here are the hyper and the chorus. Now the hyper gives a little bit more width to it, and so does the chorus, and that's really important for that brassy type of tone. We want maximum type of width to it. Let's turn them off and see how it sounds. And then back on. And the great thing about this sound is you could really use it in a lot of different ways. It's a pad, but it could work as a bit of a lead. It could you could turn up the chorus even, or the hyper, and you see that it has a completely different character, more ambient type of sound to it. And the delay and the reverb, of course, are kind of to taste. I have them pretty low in the mix, not too much. I would probably replace them anyway, but just to give the character of the sound here. Very dry without them. So the really important aspect of this sound is really the filter. The filter is really what gives the sound its character. If we were to turn it off, still sounds nice, but doesn't have that bite to it. So anytime you want really brassy sounds, you have to remember a few things. First is chorus gives you a lot of brassy type of metallic type of sounds. The hyper helps as well. You want something as close to a saw wave as possible. So saw waves are great, but play around with different types of things. The basic mini is a great shape here. You'll find a lot of different variations on saw waves as well. So play around with it and see what you can figure out as well. Label this one as a pad, but this could be a lead very easily. And here's how it sounds. So it's got that very characteristic synthwave sound to it. a lot of resonance that gives it that character. So let's see how we make it. So to start, we have all three oscillators at work here, including the sub. What you'll notice a lot in a lot of synthwave music is that the wave shapes are often very simple. So we're using a basic saw, a square, or maybe a variation of a square here, and another saw on the sub. And it's all filtered out, and we even have the noise going here. So the only kind of tweak you could see is that there's unison on the saw wave. So I like to dial it up to about 4, give it a little bit of a stereo sound to it, but not too much. The next thing we can look at here is the fine. As you'll see, a lot of my presets have an LFO link to it. So I link the LFO to the fine to give it that kind of wavy type of character. So let's see how we bypass it. That sounds okay. Let's put it back on. And if you can see, if I put it all the way up, it has that weird sound. But when we turn it down, gives it that slight wobbliness to it, which is kind of indicative of a lot of vintage synthesizers. So let's move down here and take a look at the envelopes and the LFO. We just mentioned that the LFO is just basically working on the fine knob, so it's not really doing too much other than that. And I like to keep the envelopes pretty similar. Just a bit of decay here, and the sustain is not all the way up, and a little bit of release. This is kind of an important part, because if we take the release down, really cuts out the sound quickly, so we just want a tiny bit of a tail here. That gives it just a nice finish to it. So let's go back up and take a look at the filter. Now the filter is really important here. Basically gives it the entire character. So I attached envelope 2 here to the cutoff, and let's just take the filter off and see what happens. Completely different sound, very buzzy, just completely different. But when we turn it on, gives it that character. So part of it is the envelope opening. If we bypass it, it'll be a lot darker, you'll see. Very low. But here, gives it that nice, cool sound to it. One thing I should mention that's really important is the resonance. It kind of gives it that very characteristic sound, you know, the Daft Punk kind of lead. Very, very plain without it. That's what it is when it's a little bit exaggerated. And here's where I had it before, roughly. Yes. And I also didn't mention before, but let's go back to it and talk about the other two oscillators that we had on. So the sub just adds a little bit of a kind of extra layer to it. Sounds fine, but when you want a little bit more character, a little bit of a bottom end will help it. You can also just turn it off very easily and say that might work in your mix. So just up to you. And the noise here, let's turn off the other oscillators and listen to it. Yeah, just a little bit. That adds just that kind of whooshiness to the sound as far as I could describe. And that kind of helps it. It's very subtle, barely in the mix. You could turn it up a little bit. To me, that's a little bit too high. So I like to keep it around here. It's subtle, but it makes a difference. It's there. Now let's go over to the effects. The effects, again, you'll see a lot of my sounds are pretty simple in terms of the effects. I often use a variation of distortion, chorus, reverb, and delay. Sometimes EQ, of course, compression. But those are your main kind of sounds that you want to hear in Synthwave, especially these three. Distortion I use pretty subtly. You can hear it definitely gives a little bit of a drive to it. Just a little bit though, not too much. We're getting a little bit too crunchy there, I think. So I don't like to put it all the way up in the mix. Chorus, again, really low in the mix here. Just adds a little bit of dimension. All these things add up though, you know, it's not always going to be like right in your face, but just enough. And then the reverb and delay, you could obviously hear. Sounds very dry without any reverb. But again, I don't have it very high in the mix. And delay as well, you could hear it. It's kind of a little bit dead without it. Just a little bit. I wanted to talk about a lead sound I created called Orbit. So it's a very lush kind of synth sound that's pretty typical in a lot of synthwave music. It could be used as a lead, and it could even be used as kind of chords if you want. It's pretty versatile. So I'm not going to take you from the very beginning, but wanted to show you some of the principles behind it. So I started with the PWM Juno on both oscillators. Let me just zoom in here so I can show you. Now, as you'll see in the fine section here, one is at 5, the other one's at -8, and this kind of creates a different kind of a phasey type of sound to it. So let me just take it down a notch and I'll show you how it affects the sound. So it sounds pretty good still, but it doesn't have that width and that phasiness to it. You see? So it really changes the dynamic there. And again, over here, you'll see that there's a bunch of unison to it. Now I'll take it down and show you how it sounds without it. It's still kind of cool, and this is actually a good way to use it if you're using mono and just want to kind of direct lead without the width to it. But I kind of like the width as well, and you can blend that in a different way, so you could adjust it here. Make it wider or make it narrower, whatever works for your song. Let's head down to check out the envelopes. So both envelopes are pretty similar. There's a kind of a significant decay and sustain here. Now I don't want the sound to be too loud and too sustained here. You could hear that wishy-washy kind of sound to it once the sustain goes up. So let's turn that back down. The decay is important too, because if you have it too short, kind of this almost plucky sound to it. Whereas as I want a kind of a more lush sound to it. The release is also very important. As you could hear, it just kills the sound instantly. You want to kind of flow out of it. Now the LFOs here, The LFOs actually control the wavetable position on both oscillators. So let me just zoom out and show you how that works. You'll see here I kind of put them in a very similar position. Let's just take it off and see how that sounds. Or bypass it, let's say. That sounds pretty good, but we want that kind of movement to it, which is what LFOs do. Put it back here. And we could even see how it sounds when we turn it up a little bit. Sounds good, pretty good either way. Now, the filter here really cuts out kind of those harsh upper range harmonics, but really doesn't do a ton. So let's go into the effects rack. The effects, I have a little bit of distortion and drive to it, but not too much. Makes a little bit of a difference, not too much, just enough to add a little bit of color to it. The chorus again is not super chorusy. Adds just a little bit to it, a little bit of width. The delay, of course, the delay and the reverb are the main effects here. You can really hear out in the tail. It just keeps it up a little bit, and reverb, of course. Sounds completely dead without the reverb, really. So why don't we get started here? The first sound I called Slow Crossing. Don't ask how I come up with these names. They just come to me and they mean nothing usually. This one really is a cool kind of ascending pad that is really meant to fill out a lot of space and is really kind of angelic in a lot of ways. So why don't we listen to it? So as you can hear, it's really kind of got that slow attack and it builds towards that sound. So why don't we take a look at how I created it? So unlike a lot of my synthwave sounds, this one required a little bit more creativity when it came to the oscillators. As you can see, we don't have the standard kind of basic oscillators. We have the PWM Genji here and the basic mini on this kind of saw tooth kind of shape, kind of. I don't know what you would call it exactly, but it's kind of got that saw aspect to it. Then we have the sub with a saw, and we have some bright white noise as well that we'll talk about in a moment. There's some voices of unison here. Let's listen to these on their own maybe to get more appreciation here for what they're all doing. As you can hear, that has a ton of detunement. And a lot of kind of weird grit that you don't get, kind of resonant grit, I would call it. Then you add this kind of saw wave here. Just a beautiful sound, but it's not as detuned, so it's more of the fundamental aspect of it. They both really complement each other nicely, and you can hear that PWM coming through at the end, giving it that detunement. The sub here, adding a little bit of extra layers here, and then we have the noise here. You could hear that kind of whistling sound coming through in the end there. Now, the envelopes here, as you can see, envelope 2 is really what kind of creates this sound. It opens it up from a very low point in the cutoff and really opens it up almost all the way. And then slowly kind of drifts back. So it's not going to be a very sustained sound, but it's really going to come through your mix in a lot of ways because it's got that nice opening up of it. And you can play around with the cutoff a little bit. I just put it here just because I really wanted those upper harmonics coming through here. There's a little bit of detunement here with the LFO through the fine knobs, but not too much. The effects here, pretty simple. As you could hear, there's a bunch of reverb and delay and some chorus, but none of these are really adding tons and tons of information here. As you can hear, the delay and reverb do kind of sustain it a little bit better, and I would recommend using some sort of form of delay or reverb, whether it's through Serum or something else. But that's how I created this sound. So when we take a look at the next one. So this next one is a little bit more of a traditional kind of synthwave sound, I would call it. The last one, you know, you could use those types of pads in a lot of different forms of music, but this one I would call a little bit more traditional, and this is modeled after the Juno synthesizer. It's obviously not going to be the exact recreation. Serum has its limitations, but I really want to offer a little bit kind of that interesting analog character. So let's hear it. So as you can hear, it's got a bit of that Juno kind of quality to it. It's not complicated. Here we have specifically using the Juno the Juno oscillator here. Sorry, the Juno wave shape through this oscillator. Got 5 voices of unison. The first envelope here, it's almost kind of like a keys oscillator, so it's not a fully sustained pad by any means. And then I have it opening up as well on the filter. LFO1 really, as you can see, very, very quick kind of detunement on the fine knob here. Really adding that instability, you know, that analog character to it. Here we have some basic kind of hyperdimension and chorus, just adding a little bit of that width as well as the reverb. Sounds nice on its own, really. I found that these just add a little bit more character, a little bit more space, but you can obviously take those out and use them however you would like. This last pad that I want to show you is called Upcoming Feature. Felt like this was kind of like making me feel like I'm back in the old days for movies, the drive-through. I don't know why, but let's listen to it. I really think this has a lot of great kind of analog-y type of vintage character, so that just really reminded me of the old school movies. Let's take a look at how I created this one. Again, used a little bit different than your standard wave shapes. We have the PWM DS and the saw that's rounded, a little bit of noise. This one is really adding a lot of that detune kind of weird character. You can hear the noise in the background. The saw is a little bit more standard. And this PWM is really doing a lot of work here. A slower attack to open it up. The second envelope again is kind of opening up the filter a little bit. Really depends on your taste here. Kind of really depends on what you want to do. You can open up the filter a lot. And just that detunement and this kind of weird flip I have here. As you can see, it's really changing the character a lot through the LFO. Adding some more detunement through the fine knob again, and then a little bit less detunement on this one. Just a little bit of wobble, little bit of movement to give it that analog character. Then again, we have the hyper here. This is really adding a ton of width, and so it just really kind of fills out the space more. There's some flange going on here. That is definitely giving it some character to some of that instability, but really messing kind of with the filter. And that's what the flanger really does. It kind of messes with the sound a little bit. Some chorus here and some reverb just to fill it out a little bit. But overall, it's really got that nice kind of... You can play it an octave up as well. It kind of gives it more of a string sound. Really nice kind of old school sound to it. So let's get to this one. This is a pad called Slow Swell. So as you can hear, this is a very lush kind of chord sound, really meant to have a lot of sustain to it, and kind of a slower developing sound. Because of that, there's the layers to it. There's going to be a little bit more to it than some of the sounds that I previously showed. So let's get into it. So first, let's take a look at the oscillators. You can see 3 different oscillators here, or sorry, 2 different ones, using 3 separate ones. So the sub here has a saw wave here, 1 octave below, and then another saw wave on oscillator A, and the basic MG or basic Moog is also tuned down an octave. So those are the 3. And then we take a look at the unison. Obviously, we have that big sound to it, so we need a little bit of unison and voicing to it. As you can see, I kept the detune up a little bit actually on the Moog. Let's hear it without A. A lot more detune than your typical sounds that you hear in Synthwave. That's a little bit more standard there, just the saw wave, but I wanted to add a little bit of complexity to the sound. So as you can hear, there's that detuned sound in the background of it. Now, I didn't do too much with the wavetables or anything like that. There's enough to it already in the envelopes and the LFOs, so let's take a look. Actually, before I zoom in on the envelopes and LFOs, just wanted to mention again, I've mentioned them a bunch of times in my previous videos, so check those out, that I have attached the LFOs to the fine knob, and that obviously creates that slight wobble sound that you usually hear. Just a very subtle nuance to it to give it a little bit more character. But let's take a look at these LFOs here. All right, and the envelopes actually. So I didn't attach the second envelope to the filter as I often do. Just the first one actually, because I wanted to slowly open up. And so if I didn't have that on, let's bypass it. So yeah, you can hear it slowly creeping up and then decays slowly as well. But it doesn't give us that nice lush sound to it, and that's why we need to attach it to the filter. And then over to LFOs, I did actually, I didn't mention this before, there's 2 things. The first is, let's zoom back out. The LFO is actually attached to the detune here on the saw wave on oscillator A. You can see it's just slightly moving. It's on a bar rate here, so it's not going to be very apparent, but it needs to give us some sort of movement because it's a slow pace to the sound. So we don't want it to sound boring and just a basic swell to it. The other thing is, as you can see, it's also attached to the cutoff. So let's bypass alpha 1. Again, it gives us a little bit more of those upper ranges. And it just subtly moving in the background there at the end too, which is really, again, it just gives us more character. And then finally, I wanted to mention that I have the noise on as well. You can hear at the very end there, the kind of sound. That's what the noise does in this situation. Really kind of gives it that upper range that is not there otherwise. So let's just hear one more time with it off first. And now with it on. You can hear that at the very end coming in. And that's just in the analog again, that the J60 chorus. Now let's move over to the effects rack. This is a little bit more, I would say a little bit more involved than my usual settings. You can see there's the classic chorus, delay, and reverb. I'm not going to go into too much detail about all of these. I do cut out a bunch of the lows. But I do keep the resonance in a little bit here just because I think it's a little bit more interesting. However, I digress here. So let's go back up and talk about the distortion. You don't want to get too distorted with pads because then you're really going to get a crunchy kind of distorted sound. That is a little bit too much for me. Just enough in the background. And the phaser is a great sound to create movement in the background. Now let's turn this off. It's, again, pretty subtle, even though it's pretty high in the mix. There you could hear it, because it's really moving back and forth. I had the rate down quite a bit. If you were to turn the rate up, I'm not going to, but if you turn the rate up, you could really hear it. To me, that it gets a little bit annoying, but I like having the rate low, and it just comes in and out. And then the chorus here obviously creates that width and dimension. So all of these things, the chorus, the phaser, the LFOs, the envelopes, the slight detuning, all of these things add up. You don't need to overdo any of them because a little subtlety here and there always creates a better, richer sound. You don't need to go overboard, otherwise it'll just sound kind of messy. And in this situation, we have a slow swell that is trying to create kind of like an ambient sound. It's meant to convey a certain type of sound and a certain type of emotion, and you don't need to go overboard. It's supposed to be subtle. But let's take a look how to make it. So the first thing you'll notice is the 3 oscillators at work here. Now I have a couple different types. So let's zoom in and look. So the first 2 on the sub, I have the saw wave, and on oscillator A, I also have the saw wave. Both of those are pitched down a couple octaves. And on oscillator B, I have just a square wave. Now, as you'll see, the unison is at 1. That's just because it's kind of a deep sound, so I don't want to have stereo imaging on or side imaging on the lower frequencies. And you'll also notice that the square wave is pitched down 3 octaves and not just 2. So here's the difference in sound. So it makes quite a bit of a difference. Now, the next thing is the fine knobs. I'll show you later that I have the LFOs attached to them, but I also have the fine pitch at 13 and minus 13. So that creates this kind of interesting width and texture to them. It kind of shows you that you can have a phasey sound to them almost. Kind of plain when they're just like this. I mean, it sounds fine, but you could definitely have them be a little bit more interesting. As you can hear, almost has that phase sound to it. Now, let's move on to the envelopes here and the LFOs. The envelopes, it's a very basic kind of pluck to it. It has kind of a sustained sound to it because of the depth of the square and a bit of release too. But it's pretty short, the decay. I didn't want to be super bouncy. I just wanted that little bit of extra sound to it. Now the LFO, as you can see before, it was attached to the fine knob, so that again gives it a little bit of extra dimension. And you can see it moving here when I turn it on. You can see it moving back and forth. So that kind of creates that little interesting sound to it. Now I wanted to show you as well that the LFO is attached to the filter. As you'll see a couple things here. You definitely want the filter on for a bass sound, because here's what happens when it's not on. You get a lot of upper harmonics, and it's going to interfere with a lot of synth sounds or lead sounds you may have in your songs if you don't cut out at least some of those. As you'll notice as well, the resonance is up. That kind of creates that unique sound that you get from resonance. The drive is up as well. Now the LFO, you'll notice it slowly moves back and forth. So let's go back and check it out. And that LFO here is set to 4 bars. So it kind of is meant to move back and forth slowly, not open up too quickly. And that's what gives it that kind of interesting back and forth movement to it. And that really gives you a lot of flexibility as well in the song. You can turn it down even more to 8 or 16 bars, whatever you want. It just kind of is meant to be slowly opening and closing. So let's move over to the effects. The effects are very basic. Since it's a bass, I don't like to put in too many effects. I did put in a little bit of reverb here. You can hear a little bit. Now, if you don't want to turn it up too much, because if you do, you'll start to muddy up the signals a lot, and that will create a lot of different problems in your mixes as well. But let's get into this. So we're just going to set up a quick little patch here. Or sorry, we're going to set up a little pattern here. So let's just do this to start. It really doesn't matter. We're going to just do like a quick 2-bar bass pattern here. And it's just meant to just get us started. I always like to just kind of get a little basic pattern going, just because it just makes things a little bit easier, and you don't have to be, constantly pressing buttons. So I like to go into presets here and choose a different template. Let's go with maybe this Jupe 6 I kind of like. So just right off the bat, this is the kind of default sound. Really lovely, isn't it? Well, we got a long way to go to form a nice bass. So why don't we start off here? I'm going to, let's pick out a different wave shape here for both 1 and 2. And we're going to both use both oscillators. Obviously, in this preset here, we have to use this mix button. So I'm going to do 1 on this kind of shape we have here. This is kind of like a pulse wave. Anything with a square or pulse will be basically what we want. And then I'm going to use this as a saw wave here. So I'm going to kind of blend this in. First, let's take these both down, and we're going to take the cutoff down as well. So right now we have this pretty high up. Obviously, you could do it either way. You can put this on the piano roll lower or just take it down there. So let's just listen to it here. So you can hear this is purely the saw, and this is basically the pulse, but a mix is always nice. So we can hear it's a little bit wide, and we can take it down a notch here. Nice thing about Diva too is you can combine these as well, so you don't have to just have one or the other per oscillator. You could add more wave shapes here, and we can play around with that. Thicken it more this way. Okay, next thing I'm gonna do is play with this this ADSR. Now the ADSR is a really key aspect of getting the bass right, and I'm going to show you real quickly. You want a plucky sound here. If you have a sustained, fully sustained sound, it's going to get very muddy very quickly. It doesn't sound like it now, but if you were to add elements later, it definitely would. And then the other part here is if your decay is too short, not much of a bass there all of a sudden. Even here is not very great. So we're going to turn it up. And then to make it even a little bit more of a transient sound, we're going to do basically the same with the second envelope. And we're actually going to turn the kickoff down, or the cutoff down, kickoff, and then turn the envelope up. As you can hear, it's already a different sound. It's got much more of a transient sound too. And this is one of those very easy kind of elements that you can slowly incorporate and automate as well. And of course, we can change up this pattern too. We can make it faster by simply doubling the notes. And when you do something this fast, you really want to pay attention to the ADSR again, because let's just open up slightly here. If we had a lot more decay here, you can hear that underlying kind of grit to it that just doesn't go away essentially. But now all of a sudden, and we can play around. What if we turn it down another octave? Now we're really getting into a nice bass sound here. A real nice deep bass sound here. If we were to turn it down another octave, it's a little low here. So we're going to stick with this one. And let's just play around with some of the effects maybe here. So let's turn on the chorus. Now we're getting a nice wide sound. Again, decay is actually also something you can start to automate a little bit, just a little bit. You can really tell, like, it's a very fragile kind of element here. And we can play with some of the low pass. So this is obviously a much narrower slope, and this is a steeper slope here, not narrower. You know what I mean. But we're getting some nice sounds here. Then we can also start to think about maybe we want to shape a little bit more of this low end, and that will help if we were to turn this to a sine wave here. You can hear this much lower, right? And then we can actually just have our kind of sub bass going here with this combination of saw and pulse. Again, we got that nice kind of wide sound, and we can widen it further here by stacking more voices. You can really hear that nice deep sound now to it. Now it's all going to depend on your mix and what you want. Again, nice automation here with this cutoff. So it really kind of depends on the type of tone you want. That could be shaped by these oscillators here and the wave shapes, but also by kind of the stacking of the voices and some of these effects too. So if you want that wider sound, you get the chorus and more of the voices stacked. If you want the narrower sound, of course, you can take this off again and narrow these. So just have one stack of 4 here. You get a much different sound all of a sudden. And it really depends how this fits into what you're trying to achieve. There is no necessarily right or wrong answer, but of course, hopefully these get you some ideas. I want to show you a different init preset here. This is the Jupe 60. This one's kind of cool because you can use a couple really interesting wave shapes again, and it's just a different approach, but again, I'll show you it's pretty similar in how you can execute these sounds. So default sound is this. I'm going to turn this down, make sure it's not too loud. So pretty similar. But here are the waveforms. So we're just going to do a standard square here. We're going to transpose this down again. And then what we're going to do here is kind of boost this low end. It's at 0 here, so if you were to go higher, it's going to take out some of these low end. And then we're going to just manually kind of blend in the sub oscillator too. And we have this sawtooth working as well. This is the nice part because we can turn this off here or turn it on. To hear that grit, again, we're going to turn the cutoff down. Again, we're going to turn our sustain down. And we're going to eventually bring in this second envelope. So we're going to really turn it down here. And then we're going to blend this in. Just do a standard square. You can hear it coming in there. So a kind of a different character to it again. We're going to up these voices again. We can even put in some noise here. So it's really got that kind of dark synthwave type of sound to it. And we can play around with the sub as well, so not necessarily quite as harsh. And then we can even turn off the square completely and just have the sawtooth with the sub here, which gives it much more harsh sound when you add this noise in. And you can even play around, which is cool with this fine tuning a little bit. You can really play around, like just automate this. If it's by itself, obviously, playing around with that too much will change up a lot of the key. So don't mess around with that too much if there's other instruments playing, but just a little fun aspects there. So again, pretty simple here. We just kind of played around with the ADSR, making sure it kind of fits these plucks. The sawtooth and square combo is really the way you want to go. I often use the square on the sub and the sawtooth as kind of that additive higher element, and that's basically it. Now, again, we're making it wider or narrower depending on what we see fit, and we're playing with that cutoff as well. Now, I'm going to show you that you can create something very, very similar through Vital, and if you have Serum, that works too. It's pretty simple again, but I just kind of wanted to give you more visual aspect to this. So if we were to get a very basic shape here and switch this over to a square, and then we're going to pitch this down. I'm going to pitch this one 2 octaves down, and then let's just start with this one 1 octave down, just to give us some variety here. And again, we're going to turn on the filter for both oscillators here. And I'm going to turn this resonance down. And then we're going to make this very plucky again. And then again, we're going to take the second envelope here and then attach it to the filter cutoff. And then we're going to play around with it here. So let's start here and maybe just make the slope a little bit bigger. And then let's see how this sounds to start. You can make it really subby here. Open it up, and again, we can just do that on the same amount as well. That saw wave is really what opens it up. That gives it that gritty texture if you want. Again, so in this situation, we can up the voices. We're getting really kind of that trancey feel to it now. Really 90s, really kind of like metallic kind of sounding too, which is nice. Turn up that drive a little bit. Again, this is a great thing to automate here. And of course, you can always change up how much the envelope is opening too. So it all gives you a kind of a different feel too. The other thing too here is you can turn up the resonance. And that kind of accentuates that frequency, right? course, go into the effects here, turn on the chorus. Sounds just huge here. Can turn it down. Can turn down the mix a little bit too. And where the chorus is hitting. But yeah, there's just some ideas, and you can see just visually what it's doing here with these envelopes. I was doing basically the same thing in Diva. The thing is, every synthesizer, the nice part about Diva is it has multiple ways of doing things, not just one. So that's kind of the added benefit of Diva, is that you have those kind of analog muddled oscillators that you don't get necessarily with Vital. But as you can hear with Vital, it sounds great. Again, you could create tons of different kind of variations on the same thing, right? We're essentially getting that basic synthwave rhythm to it, but we're doing so many different things just to maybe accentuate the sound here and there with some resonance. We're kind of altering with the filter, and then I kind of want to show you just kind of more in play. So I'm going to do a quick little drum beat here, and then we're going to kind of see how it plays all together. So I'm going to put this pattern in here. Actually, why don't we just complete this real quick? So I'm going to go to my piano roll here. So I just came up really quickly with this pattern here. And that to me really sounds kind of 90s-esque even. So we have kind of the best of both worlds with a synthwave and the 90s. But of course, synthwave isn't synthwave without a good little drum beat. So we're going to go to pattern 2. So I just have this very, very basic 4 on the floor beat with this open hi-hat. And what we're going to do here is just turn down this bass a little bit. And one of the most essential part of creating a bass for synthwave is getting that sidechain going. I like to use kickstart 2. Of course, use any sidechain compression technique you want. As you can hear, it really opens up that space for that kick drum now. And you can hear it's got that nice sidechain to it, nice pumping effect. We could go back to Vital, play around with it more if we want. So there you have it, just a bunch of variations on the same idea, but as you can see, it could be done in multiple synths, and please don't feel like Vital and Diva are the ones that you need. Play around with different synths, whatever you have, and just test out some of those ideas. So remember, just set up a quick little plucky envelope, then a second envelope to open up your filter. Use the square or a pulse and a saw wave, play around with different combinations, and then try different voice of unison and see what you like. If you like that kind of bigger chorusy sound, or if you like that kind of more narrow sound as well. Play around with things. As you can see, I was really just kind of going with the flow here. Synthwave basses don't need to be all identical. They really have different characteristics, and make them your own whatever way you feel is best. So I'm going to show you 4 different patterns and how to make them. And then we're going to show some variations and how to use some cool tricks to kind of make them a little bit more interesting as well. So let's just get started right away with this first one, and this one will be the simplest one, and it's probably the most ubiquitous one. So you'll hear it in all different types of synthwave tracks, and that's this kind of plucky bass line that's just everywhere in synthwaves. So let's get into how to make it. First, I'm going to show you this very simple preset called Easy B, and typically you'll find that it's a combination of a square and a saw, and this one is just that. And this one I actually utilized the sub here to make a square, and then I use the saw on oscillator A, and then you'll see there's a little bit of chorus. This is actually a little bit different. This one's a little bit wider than your typical ones. You see it's 4 voice of unison. If I were to take it down, it works well too. So there's just one variation. If you want to make it a little bit more interesting and wider, then you just have to add some voices of unison in Serum. And the other thing I should mention, I'll be using Serum for all of these, but a lot of these you could easily replicate in different synths, especially this one. You can see it's just a saw and a square. Don't feel the need that you have to create a sub here either. You can use just basic oscillators. You can see it's a very, very plucky sound. So the first envelope is just this very basic kind of pluck. And then I have this one attached to the filter envelope. Make sure you have kind of a tighter filter, not like a 6 or a 12 dB, but 18, 24, something like that. Just because you don't want all those highs to get through. So let's just create a pattern real quick. So let's start with A here, and I'm actually going to take this BPM down to, let's say 110. So it's a little bit faster. And then I'm just going to copy and paste. So super simple. Then we're going to just create a nice 4-bar loop, and let's just see what we could come up with here real quick. Let's go a little bit lower maybe. Okay. And then maybe finish with a D. That might be a little too low. Let's see. What if I were to up it an octave here? Maybe we'll end off with this note here. We can also move them all up an octave. So there you have a very basic kind of synthwave bass line. So this is kind of a top bass. It has a little bit of that lower end as well, but you can also take that off very easily. So if I were to take this sub oscillator off, and then let's create a pattern with another square here. And we're going to just route this to the filter as well. And then take this down a couple octaves. Yeah, I think I prefer that. Yeah, this just sounds better to me. And of course we can speed this up as well. So now we have 16th notes instead of 8th notes. And to make it more interesting, so we will put this on its own mixer track. And let's sidechain it. And one plugin I like to use a lot is Kickstart 2, because it's just a simple sidechain. So now we get that nice sidechain, that kind of pumping effect that you hear a lot. sounds almost delayed a little bit, which is interesting, just because that ducking effect. The 8th I think doesn't work great. The 4 on the floor really works well because Synthwave has so many 4 on the floor beats. So there you have it. There's just the first one. Very simple, very common to hear this in either 8th or 16th notes, and very easy to create. Like I said, it's a saw and a square. Play around with it, see what works best for you. You can have a little bit of voice of unison to make it a little wider like I did, but you can also have it straight up the middle and it works great too. This should work in basically any synth that you have. So this next sound is also from my upcoming preset pack, Synthwave Essentials Volume 4, and it's actually one of my favorite presets I think I've ever created for bass in particular. This one I call Growly 90s. Not sure why I came up with that. It has nothing to do with the 90s at all. It's really nothing to do with any particular decade. It's really more of a modern type of bass, but it really is a great bass sound and works well with a lot of synthwave music. This one's a little bit different. It's more of a sustained bass, and this one should remind you a little bit of a really, really popular song by The Weeknd, Blinding Lights. Now, it's not an exact recreation, but I was really inspired by that. I just really like this sound a lot. So let's break down first how to create this, and then we'll just make a little quick bass line with it. So first, let's take a look at the oscillators. You can see I have this basic mini here, and it's this kind of second shape here. It's kind of a sine wave, but it's got a little bit of a kind of notch to it. And then it has a saw wave here as well. Now the saw wave has the 4 voices unison, and it kind of gives that width that you hear here. And then we have a just basic sine on the sub. So we have both of these, the sub and the first oscillator, down 2 octaves. But then I have this saw on just the normal octave, or the default octave, which kind of gives it that depth, but also that higher frequency that you hear. Then next, the filter is on a MG low 12, so it kind of lets more of those kind of highs come through. So the one thing with this, you can switch the cutoff a little bit. However, this really is meant to be kind of a focal point of a song. It's not going to kind of sing in the background. And the reason for that is we're letting some of those highs through. So if you're using this, just remember you don't want to be kind of adding too many synths over top of it. Otherwise, it'll start to sound muddy. The next thing we'll talk about here is the fine tuning here. You can see one is -8 and one is 8. Again, that gives a little bit more width and some detuning as well. Now the first envelope, it's not fully sustained, and there's a little bit of an attack. And then the second envelope does nothing. I forgot that that has nothing to do with it, but the LFO is actually what controls the cutoff. As you see, as you can see there, it's really kind of going back and forth, and I kind of made its own rate here. I didn't do it on a BPM. Just found that that works best. Feel free to play around with this rate if you want to put it up a little bit or put it down. I just like it right here. Next thing is the effects. There's a bunch of effects here, so I put up a little bit of hype right here. Some distortion, quite a bit of it, some tube distortion in particular. Then we have some chorus, again, a little bit more width, and then a little bit of reverb here. So again, keep in mind, this is really going to take over your track when you put it in, and it's meant to be kind of a focal point of a track. So I made this real quick bass line here. Let's just listen to it. So it works great there. We can also move it up an octave. As you can see, it has a ton of power to it, and it's really meant to be kind of that focal point. Now you add some drums to it and just some simpler keys. I would say probably more in the higher register. Those mids are really taken over there by this bass. And then you're going to have a great start to your song. So this next bass line I'm going to show you how to create is kind of in between the last two. It's not a fully sustained one, and it's not plucky either. It's a super simple one to make. Again, this will be in my next preset pack, but I'm going to show you how to make it right now, and you should be able to make it in any synth. This one is going to be kind of a mix between the two. It's really meant to be kind of not fully plucky, but it's not going to be a fully sustained sound either. It kind of sounds like this. So the thing with that is it has a lot of transients at the beginning. It has that really quick kind of pluck, but it also has that sustain to it as well, but at a lower level, right? It's not fully sustained. As you can see here, we have a couple of saws again. This one utilizes a little bit of unison, so it has that width to it, and then it has the square on the sub. The other thing is we have some noise here. It adds just a little bit of more kind of transient. Again, it's meant to be kind of coming through the mix at the beginning and then kind of sustaining a little bit, but not taking over the whole mix either. As you can see, the first envelope here it has that kind of pluck look to it, but with a little bit of a sustain too. The other thing is the second envelope really modulates the filter here on a low 24, so it lets all those harmonics come through while sustaining at a much lower level. The other thing is we have a little bit of distortion here, some hard clip, some compression as well, not a lot, and then just a little bit more low filtering here. Felt like it just needed a little bit more. Again, you can play around with it however you like. You can lower this cutoff too. So it has that potential to very easily be kind of a pluck, but it's really meant to have kind of that sustain as well. So let's just create a quick pattern. And how I envision this one is kind of creating some half notes, which you don't often see in Synthwave, and that's why I kind of want to create it. So here's this creation here. And we can also just put them at the quarter notes here. So it has that plucky ability, and you can take it down even more if you like, but I really wanted to have a little bit of kind of sustain here and a little bit of a slower tone. And this kind of works if you're kind of trying to build up a song. As you can see, it's 104, but this kind of really gently kind of gradually gets us into the song here. Even at 114, it doesn't feel like you're in a hurry here, and it kind of gives you an ability to change it up. You can quickly make this into a different pattern as well and add some sidechain if you want, like the others that we saw before. So those are the first three, and I really kind of wanted to give you some options here on how to create those bass lines. So this last bass line, I'm going to show you how to create it first, and then we're going to play around with different synthesizers and different presets. This one is actually a little bit different, and I really like it. I don't find it's used quite as often in Synthwave, but it really works well, I find. And that's just the kind of octave jump, let's call it. So you see here, we have just a simple 2-bar bass line, and it's jumping from one octave to the other, from C4, C5, and then A3 to A4. And it's really meant to be kind of that up-tempo vibe as well. And the great thing is you can use a lot of different presets in this pattern. And let's take a look at right now. So let's take a look here. I picked this one to start. This is kind of a lower, more sustained bass line, but it's kind of works well, I think. So let's just listen to it. And it's a really subby type of bass. So if you don't have good earphones, or if you're listening on just your laptop, you might not be able to hear it as well. So it's kind of got that darker edge to it here, but just as much you can use a very kind of basic pluck as well. Or you could use something a little bit more gritty like this. Now, if you're going to use that, remember that's going to take up a lot of room in your mix. So that's going to be it for all of these bass lines. So there's 4 there that you can use for your own music.